In this episode, I'll share some words from the great master Nuno Oliveira. They are simple yet powerful and something that you can apply to your riding starting today. They also dovetail beautifully with the principles and methods I teach in the Dressage Naturally program. All right, so here we go. Technique and soul. Hi, I'm Karen Rohlf, and welcome to Horse Training in Harmony. This podcast is about you making progress with your horse in a way that you both can love. It's about learning how to move and be in harmony. Because yes, you really can develop a horse to be both athletic and happy. When we show up as our best selves for our horses will show up for us. So, let's get started. I came across these words that I'm going to share with you today on this episode as I was scrolling through Facebook, but they were actually shared by my good friend and international jumping rider, Luca Moneta. Now, I don't know the original source of these words or where these words were first published. I mean, I know that they were said to be said by Nuno Oliveira. And maybe somebody who's listening to this episode recognizes where they were first published. And you can email me or message me on Facebook and let me know, because I'd love to come back here and credit the source. But we do know, apparently, they're from Nuno Oliveira. You know, he gave so many gifts to the horse world, and these words are really an example of that. So I'm going to read them, and then I'll go back through them and add some of my own thoughts and kind of dive a little deeper into my interpretation of them. All right, so here we go. The post was just started by saying, Nuno Oliveira has said, "The tragedy of horse riding is that despite all the knowledge of the riders, the horse reflected faster than the man. You don't have to stop observing horses. Horseback riding isn't a precise science. You need to hear and not have a system in your head. There's no such thing as horseback riding. There are simply riders who have more or less equestrian touch, and the others. There are two things in riding, technique and soul. Horse riding is not the search for success in public and self-pleasure after some applause. It's not even pleasing a jury at all costs. It's the dialogue in the head with the horse and the search for understanding and perfection. In horse riding, there can be no real method because every horse is a chance. Dressage is not about performing difficult airs. It's about making the horse more gentle, flexible, and giving him better balance. Training is a search for roundness. Training is perfecting the three natural attractions of the horse. Equestrian art is the poetry of it all. A trained horse is a flexible horse, pleasant to ride, happy, and not a horse that gestures. Technique can lead to a certain level, but beyond that, you need the psychological attachment of the horse. Equestrian art is made of an infinite amount of small details and the feeling of the rider. Equestrian art begins with the perfection of simple things. Equestrian art is the art for the rider to be calm and keep his horse straight. Loosen up the technique to go up with the heart. You need to feel it and get to the emotion. All right, so on the one hand, that can just stand alone. And I know you guys get it. And you certainly don't need me to do reading comprehension with you. But I would like to dive into that a little bit and kind of go through it line by line and just have a little chat. I mean, I got a podcast. That's what it's for, right? Anyway, so let's start back at the beginning. The tragedy of horse riding is that despite all the knowledge of the riders, the horse reflected faster than the man. Yeah, I think so often trainers and riders focus on, sort of doing what's supposed to be done, the system of that stable or the system of that particular master. And if something isn't working, it ends up because, it's the horse that's the problem, because we have the knowledge, we know how it's done, this is the system, this is the way. So if a horse isn't getting it, then it's a problem with the horse, rather than reflecting on oneself. And that's strangely more and more difficult to do when people consider themselves professional or experienced. It's a tricky blend as you get experienced. In the one hand, you want to be confident with what you do and not doubting yourself all the time. On the other hand, as soon as you think you know is the moment you don't. And it seems like the more years that go by and the more horses I train, the more I realize more fully everything that I don't know, which to me is a gift because it keeps the curiosity in me. It keeps me reflecting. Despite all the knowledge of the riders, the horse reflected faster than the man. So it's a message to me to continue the humble the humble reflection. And when you can be in that humble reflection, that's where the horse is. You get to enter that moment that the horse is in, right? The horse is always in the moment, is always fully feeling what's actually happening right now. Then he says, you don't have to stop observing horses. Yeah. Not only do you not have to, you really ought not to stop. I mean, the moment we stop observing horses is the moment we're treating them as if they will always be exactly as they are. And that's treating them like objects or machines. One horse is the same as another horse, and this horse is just how that is, so we don't have to observe them anymore because we know, and we just do it. We stick a label on it. This is a stubborn horse. This is a whatever horse. Oh, it's a chestnut mare. I've trained horses like this a million times. No, we ought not stop. We don't have to stop observing horses, and we really shouldn't stop observing horses. Then he says, horseback riding isn't a precise science. You need to hear and not have a system in your head. Now, this really speaks to me. Well, the whole thing does, but it spoke to me a lot, and it really resonates and manifests. This thought manifests in how I teach. And so it's a kind of a paradox of like, I have a system, but don't have a system. You need to be hearing your horse and not having that system in your head. So that's kind of connecting to what we said earlier. It's like, this is the way, and if it's not working, it's the horse's problem. So you don't want to have such a rigid system, but as it's turned out, the system that I've created is actually a system that has flexibility built into it. So when he says you need to hear, I think about in Dressage Naturally program and in what I teach, really prioritize the quality of the communication between the horse and rider as more important than the actual result that's coming out. So the critique of the quality of the movement only is important after you've established a quality of a communication between the horse and rider. For example, it doesn't matter how perfect that extended trot is if the horse is doing it by taking off with the rider and running out of the arena, right? And the person was trying to stop at the time. So to help riders trust that they can hear their horse's responses and they can adjust their communication until there's harmony and understanding. So for me, clarity, that clarity of communication is kindness. And so you need to hear and not have a system. And the system that I've developed is sort of an unsystem. It's less about rigid steps, and it's more about a framework that gives students certain questions to ask their horse, and then, most importantly, the freedom to experiment with them, the freedom to observe their horse, try something, see what happens, change it. So when I teach even live in person, it's only past a certain stage when I start, giving more particular suggestions of tempo or things like that. Most of the time in the beginning, it's about, how does that feel to you? What are you asking for? Is your horse matching your picture? Let me know when you feel it. So that freedom to experiment while observing their horse and listening to and feeling for how it affects them. So the system I have is a system to teach riders how to do that, how to be experimental and have the certain tools in their toolbox that they need to then play with freely, scribble on the page, see what comes out. All right, so he then says, there's no such thing as horseback riding. There are simply riders who have more or less equestrian touch and the others. There are two things in riding, technique and soul. And I just love that, as you can tell, because I named this episode Technique and Soul. I mean, it's not just technique and feel, but technique and soul. What a powerful place to drop in your soul. He could have chosen a lot of words there. It just, to me, this is so much more than just feel. Oh, feels soft, feels bracey, feels bouncy. It's a knowing and a trusting of oneself deeply. I tempt students all the time to trust their instincts of what they're feeling. And when I tell people to trust their instincts of what they're feeling, it's beyond like, this feels wrong or this feels crooked. It's more of this like deep feeling of harmony versus disharmony. And sometimes students don't even have words for it. When you focus on this harmony versus disharmony, everybody recognizes and seeks harmony if given the opportunity. And a lot of times students and horses aren't given the opportunity to recognize and definitely not seek it. And so in this freedom of experimentation and in this deep trusting, we have that space to go look for something as deep as harmony. And yeah, you need some techniques to get there, right? So if you're going to experiment and find where your horse, feels the best, you might need to ask him to go a little faster, a little slower, move a shoulder here or there. So you need some techniques to be able to ask for that clearly and have your horse understand those communications. But the soul, that deep trust in yourself, is what's going to have you go, yes, in the moment that you feel it. Because sometimes that yes happens in a really weird time. When you experiment with horses, you can feel a horse is crooked or out of alignment or something stuck, and you might be able to say, well, clearly the right shoulder is sticking out to the right, so clearly I need to keep that shoulder from doing that. But then as you experiment, you might find, whoa, that's weird. When I increase the bend to the left and let the horse sort of spiral out to the right, all of a sudden he felt freer and started breathing and stretching. And it makes no sense, but it's true. And if you're not feeling it deeply and trusting yourself on that soul level, the level that every body, every soul can recognize and seek harmony if given the opportunity, you might pass that over because it's not logical. But your horse is telling you, and your body's telling you. There are two things in riding, technique and soul. I love that. He then says, horse riding is not the search for success in public and self-pleasure after some applause. It's not even pleasing a jury at all costs. It's the dialogue in the head with the horse and the search for understanding and perfection. Now, this reminds me a little bit of the episode I did, episode 157, called In the Forest, where I pondered the question, if a horse pee-offs in the forest and no one is there to judge it, can it still be beautiful? And my answer is yes, of course, right? The real beauty of riding is that secret between the horse and rider. It's in the communication, the relationship, the dialogue, that's the priority. The quality of the communication, balance, harmony. No one on the outside can truly judge that. Now, it is possible to have this harmony and pursue goals and compete. And yeah, you might get a great score and pat yourself on the back, and people might clap and tell you that was great. And that's fine. But when that's the driver, when that's the reason for it, it gets challenging. And just even having those goals and putting yourself in front of a jury and, we want it to work. It's okay to want to do it well and get a good score, but it's no simple endeavor to do that and keep your soul. It's possible, but you just need to know what you're getting into. So many people and horses have suffered by looking outward and using the wrong measuring stick. So choose your mentors wisely and choose the people that you give permission to judge and critique you wisely. And remember to always come back to the horse. He then says, in horse riding, there can be no real method because every horse is a chance. Yeah. When he says there's no method, this, I think, comes back to the experimentation, right? He's just kind of echoing again. It's all, get the system out of your head, feel, right? Feel for what's going on. Even when you're really experienced and can make great training plans. Who here has had a perfectly brilliant training plan, and then you go out to your horse and your horse is like, not today. Different plans, right? So I understand the idea of not having the system, not having a method, because every horse, it's different. It's a different moment. You never know what's going to pop up. But here I think, when I think about statements like that, and I think of like a novice student or somebody, who's just learning, I do think it's important to say, you want to have the experience, or I think it's very valuable to have an experience of working through a system, right? So I think it's important to understand that process. Maybe not necessarily with horses, but just in learning anything, especially a physical skill. It's important to understand how methods work and what it's like to go through it. What it's like to go through a process and come out the other side. A lot of times those processes are like hero's journeys, right? It's, you go into the dark forest for a little while. And if you don't realize how methods work, or that they can be like hero's journeys, it can cause students to stop too soon. They don't go all the way through. They get to the dark forest and then they go, it's not working. Come back. Or things become random, right? They just a little of this, a little of that. So I think it's key to be able to understand a method. It doesn't mean that methods and systems are bad, but ask yourself, who is this for? What type of rider? What type of person? What does this method seek to create? What's the outcome of it? What's it aiming for? When is it appropriate to use a particular system? And when is it not? Is this for young horses or is this for advanced horses? What's the prerequisites? What type of problems does it solve? What type of riders does it work most with? What are the underlying principles? And so if you can see a method for what it is and not just like, oh my gosh, here is the method. There is no the method out there. There's just different stuff that can tend to work for certain situations and individuals. So when you're in a method, ask yourself those questions. Think about that. Who is this for? What does it seek to create? When can I use it? And then you can compare it to what's in front of you. What is the moment in front of you? I mean, there's so many systems and so many methods out there. Some for very specific things, like here's a system for teaching Piaffe, probably to a particular kind of horse with a particular kind of foundation to aim for a particular kind of goal. And you better ask that, because often the people who create those systems, they're in their own world and like, no, this is the system for Piaffe. It's the only one. And if you don't use this one, you're never going to get there. But that might not be true, because there's lots of systems out there. Which one is right for you? And other systems are more like umbrella systems. And so what I teach in general is much more of an umbrella system. It's a framework, and it's based on, and it includes lots of concepts, attitudes, principles. It's a system to help people understand how systems and things work. It's an umbrella, and that's why I can say things like it's for every horse and every rider, because it's based on core concepts, attitudes, principles, quality of communication, and general healthy biomechanics that is appropriate for, just about every horse. I said just about because I'm sure somewhere on the planet there's a horse who needs something different. I'm willing to entertain that possibility. And then I have systems within the system with increasing layers of specificity, like my system for teaching lateral work or something like that. But built into the whole sort of signature process of what I call the sweet spot of healthy biomechanics, into that protocol is the idea that no one knows the answer, and curiosity and experimentation are integral. Every moment is a new moment, and there's no one on the planet like you or your horse, and there's definitely never been any one combination that is you and your horse. So I have this little paradoxical feeling about systems, because systems do have a role, and I find them incredibly valuable to understand how they work. So what I've found is the people who will say don't stick to the system, or there's no real method, are usually people who have gone through multiple methods of things and then have realized that not one of them is perfect, and you need to flow between them and adapt in the moment and be willing to let go of them and change. So it's not that there's not methods that work for moments that you can go, hey, this sort of thing works, try this. There's lots of methods that could work. But what he says is there can be no real method, and perhaps what he's saying there is there's no one perfect, the capital THE method that is absolutely going to be the right one for everybody. He then says, dressage is not about performing difficult airs. It's about making the horse more gentle, flexible, and giving him better balance. Yes, yes, yes. The first order of business is to help the horse be emotionally okay, with us, then carrying us, and then to help them physically recover from the burden of carrying us and give the horses the skills to carry us in balance in a healthy and pain-free way. Training is the search for roundness. Training is perfecting the 3 natural attractions of the horse. Equestrian art is the poetry of it all. Yeah, nothing to add there. A trained horse is a flexible horse, pleasant to ride, happy, and not a horse that gestures. Technique can lead to a certain level, but you need the psychological attachment of the horse. If you train long enough, you're going to meet horses who simply say no, right? So horses that remind us that nothing works if they decide not to participate, not to be psychologically participating. But now when I say that, I've heard some people use that sort of argument as a way to validate even harsh techniques. So, saying something like, oh, well, if the horse really didn't like what I was doing, he just simply wouldn't do it. He wouldn't cooperate at all. But I don't think that's fair. I think horses often have really terrible choices to make. They have really terrible options. Because what if they say no? Not everybody honors their horses when they say no. So what choices do they really have? And there's different ways that horses say no. I mean, they can just plant themselves in the ground, or they can just check out. And maybe it seems like they're doing things, but more going through the motions. Horses are by nature, I think, too tolerant and forgiving. But isn't that the gift that they give us while we're trying to learn? So, yes, without psychological agreement and attachment, you will not get brilliance and magic and true harmony. You'll get a more mechanical result. Maybe that's what he means by a happy horse and not a horse that gestures. So when I read that, I pictured that mechanical, crazy jacking up of the front legs and short body, the unnatural kind of way of moving. So, yeah. Without the psychological participation and agreement, you won't get the brilliance and the magic and the true harmony. You'll get mechanical results and an empty heart. Equestrian art is made of an infinite amount of small details and the feeling of the rider. Equestrian art begins with the perfection of simple things. So for this, I'll say yes and, because absolutely that 100% agree. But then the teacher in me comes out and thinking of the real process of learning that I've gone through and that I help students through. And I know so many students who are paralyzed by this idea of perfection. And listen, none of us would advance or learn if we didn't do step 2, unless step 1 was perfect, we wouldn't be going anywhere. I would imagine even Nuno Oliveira at one point did things imperfectly, and yet he advanced. So I think this is something that I help students a lot with, like on the Q&A calls for our courses, of when is it time to advance, or when do I need to stay back and perfect things a little more. So in reality, what I've seen is it's more of a cycle of getting things, quote, good enough to move on, while at the same time going back to perfect the basis. Wait a minute, Karen, are you traveling through time and space now? Because you said get things good enough to move on, while at the same time going back to perfect the basics. This is possible. When you're in the magic moment with horses, time and space, time stands still and space is expanded or put in a bubble or however you want to do it, but it's not normal. So yeah, you can go forward and back at the same time. I think this is true for horses and students. I mean, the truth is, sometimes first level doesn't get great until you start schooling second level. So you get first level good enough to be able to then practice some second level stuff. And in practicing the second level stuff, you're building skills that are going to help you perfect first level. And while you're doing this, get first level good enough, start practicing some second level stuff, and at the same time, keep perfecting the easier things. Give me an example, Karen. Okay. So if I have decent leg yields with a horse and good enough impulsion, I can start playing with shoulder ins. And in the first moments of shoulder ins, they're not going to be perfect. But in that same ride, when I'm deciding to start bumbling through some shoulder ins, I can be perfecting the corner that I do as I ride into that shoulder in. I can perfect the circle that I ride as I'm approaching the shoulder in to give myself the best setup. So we're always in this balance. So although I love what he's saying, equestrian art begins with the perfection of simple things, don't use that phrase to hold yourself back and think, oh my God, I can never move forward because it's not perfect yet. So I think hidden in there is the clue. He didn't say training. He didn't say riding. He said equestrian art begins with the perfection of simple things. So I think there's, where he's saying, like, we're going to train, we're going to ride, and then at the moment where we remember and we go back to perfect the things that we can, the things that are simple, now we are being the artist. And you don't have to be advanced to do that. Wherever you are in your riding, no matter how basic, there are some things that are becoming simple to you. Even if it's just, okay, now I can do posting trot without thinking about it too much. I can't canter. I really have trouble bending, stuff like that. But if posting trot now feels simple to you, that's something that now you can start to perfect as you learn and go through the process of bringing new things in that just feel like riding. It doesn't feel like art yet. That's okay. It just reminded me of something I use a lot with people who ride with me or have taken my courses know this phrase. It's when I'm playing with something, to continue that example of, okay, baby's first shoulder in, or the first time I'm doing a shoulder in with a horse, maybe who's being rehabilitated, and it's like, okay, it's a little bumbly, it's a little bit awkward, we're maybe not holding a straight line. I'll say, this is the artist's rendition of a shoulder in. And that's sort of my little way of saying, like, yeah, it's not perfect, but I'm being the artist and I'm painting on the page, and it's just the artist's rendition. It's not the final product. And that's a way I bring some lightheartedness into a situation that could potentially, maybe, if I wasn't my best self, become frustrating. Then he says, equestrian art is the art for the rider to be calm and keep his horse straight. Yes. One of my core principles is everything comes from and returns to relaxation, and that for sure has to start with the rider and carry over to the horse. Calmness is the stream that runs through everything. And straightness, keep his horse straight. Now that doesn't mean keep those legs on and block the shoulder and don't let him leak out. It's just train in a way where you're developing straightness. Straightness is, for me, balance, alignment, flow. We help the horse carry us in a pain-free way. And his last thing he says is loosen up the technique to go with the heart. You need to feel it and get to the emotion. I love to engage with students when I teach them. It's a conversation, and I ask them lots of questions, and I want to hear answers out loud. I learn so much about what they're thinking and what they're feeling, what the emotion is, by the sound of their voice. Often when I'm watching a student play with something and try to find a sweeter spot, there's a moment of breakthrough, and I'm watching and I'll get so excited, like, yes, yes, yes. But then sometimes to watch the student, it's actually really hard to tell if they felt it. Did you feel that? I ask. And they might say, yes. Or they might say, yeah. And when they answer like that, I know that they're writing from the mind. That sound, like, did you feel that? Is it matching your picture? And they go, yeah. That's a mind who's worried about right and wrong instead of a soul that knows. So we don't want to be writing from our mind who's worrying about right and wrong. We want to be writing as an artist who's trusting that their soul knows harmony. So it's an exercise I teach. It's called Yes Moments. And I make sure the rider is clear on their picture and knows the questions to be asking the horse. And then I'll say, is it matching your picture? Is that the energy you're asking for? Is that the sweet spot? And I want them to say yes when it's true. And I want them to say it out loud. And the power of helping a student trust their soul to immediately in the moment, without thinking or wondering if it's right or wrong or they're going to sound stupid, say yes to their horse. Incredibly powerful. And then there's different yeses. There's yes, 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 yes. When there's emotion in it, you need to feel it and get to the emotion. Loosen up the technique to go with the heart. All right, we did it. I'm going to read the whole thing one more time just to leave you with those words without my little babbling in between. And I hope you enjoyed this. And I hope somebody knows the original source of the publishing. So here we go from Nuno Oliveira. The tragedy of horse riding is that despite all the knowledge of the riders, the horse reflected faster than the man. You don't have to stop observing horses. Horseback riding isn't a precise science. You need to hear and not have a system in your head. There's no such thing as horseback riding. There are simply riders who have more or less equestrian touch and the others. There are two things in riding, technique and soul. Horse riding is not the search for success in public and self-pleasure after some applause. It's not even pleasing a jury at all costs. It's the dialogue in the head with the horse and the search for understanding and perfection. In horse riding, there can be no real method because every horse is a chance. Dressage is not about performing difficult airs. It's about making the horse more gentle, flexible, and giving him better balance. Training is the search for roundness. Training is perfecting the three natural attractions of the horse. Equestrian art is the poetry of it all. A trained horse is a flexible horse, pleasant to ride, happy, and not a horse that gestures. Technique can lead to a certain level, but beyond that, you need the psychological attachment of the horse. Equestrian art is made of an infinite amount of small details and the feeling of the rider. Equestrian art begins with the perfection of simple things. Equestrian art is the art for the rider to be calm and keep his horse straight. Loosen up the technique to go up with the heart. You need to feel it and get to the emotion.